Hello, I'm Kristen. I'm going to be doing my literary movie on John Steinbeck and his most famous work, The Grapes of Wrath. But first, let me give you a brief history of Steinbeck himself. John Steinbeck was born on February 27, 1902 in Salinas, California, a place whose motto today, Salad Bowl of the World, prides itself on being rich in land and rich in values. A fertile agricultural valley, Salinas resides about 25 miles from the Pacific coast, and both the valley and coast serve as settings in many of his later novels. Steinbeck attended Stanford University from 1919 to 1925 when he dropped out, leaving with no degree. Between 1925 and 1930, he worked as a laborer and journalist in New York City and published his first novel, Cup of Gold, in 1929. Although he wrote two more fictions, each based in California, he finally found success and fame, as well as financial security, with Tortilla Flats in 1935, which sold an astonishing 26,000 copies in the first year, during the midst of the Great Depression. Steinbeck was somewhat of a literary experimenter, writing a variety of topics and styles throughout his career. He wrote on the laboring class, war, travel, and even marine biology. He experimented with his narrative of Mice and Men, calling it a play novelette, with the desire of creating a work that could translate seamlessly onto stage. In 1962, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. He died following a heart attack in 1968 in New York City. The Grapes of Wrath would arguably become Steinbeck's most famous novel, though some may suggest that title could go to his novel of Mice and Men, published in 1937. Written in 100 working days, according to Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath was released on April 14, 1939. During this time, not only was America still recovering from the effects of the Great Depression, but the rest of the world was also on the brink of World War II. Despite all that, The Grapes of Wrath had reached the top of the bestseller list by May 6th, only 3 weeks after its release date. It continued to be the bestseller of 1939 and was still in the top 10 a year later in 1940. And on May 6th, 1940, it received a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. The title was appropriately taken out of the song The Battle Hymn of the Republic. The song is a reference to a biblical passage pleading for help from the suffering and injustice delivered from God at the final judgment. It also may be a reference to the ever-growing grapes of California, the promised land many migrants fled to with what remained of their hopes and dreams. The Grapes of Wrath quickly became one of the most controversial books in American history. Almost immediately following its publication, it was banned, burned, and condemned under the premise that its lewd, foul, and obscene language is unfit for use in American homes. In Kern County, California, for instance, the Board of Supervisors for their schools and libraries stated, "It has offended our citizenry by falsely implying that many of our fine people are a low, ignorant, profane, and blasphemous type, living in a vicious and filthy manner." The Associated Farmers of California, an organization created in 1934 to prevent the unionization of farm workers, also added that while they won't ban or burn the book, they would not want our women and children to read so vulgar a book, further denying the statements in the book. Although critics in 1939 expressed mixed feelings and reviews of the iconic novel, many were impressed with Steinbeck's writing and passion as a whole. Peter Monroe Jack began his review for the New York Times. There are few novelists writing as well as Steinbeck, and perhaps a very few who write better, calling The Grapes of Wrath as pitiful and angry a novel ever to be written about America. The journey across is done in superb style, one marvelous short story after another, and all melting into this long novel of the Great Trek. He concludes stating, "The story stops after 600 pages merely because a story has to stop somewhere. All this is true enough, but the real truth is that Steinbeck has written a novel from the depths of his heart with a sincerity seldom equaled. It may be an exaggeration, but it is the exaggeration of an honest and splendid writer." Another critic, Malcolm Cowley, observed, "While keeping our eyes on the cataclysms in Europe and Asia, we have lost sight of a tragedy nearer home. 100,000 rural households have been uprooted from the soil, robbed of their possessions, and turned out on the highways. Friendless, homeless, and therefore voteless, with fewer rights than medieval serfs, they have wandered in search of a few days' work at miserable wages." The novel is Steinbeck's longest, angriest, and most impressive work. Eleanor Roosevelt was asked her feelings about it while visiting migrant camps in 1940. "I've never thought The Grapes of Wrath was exaggerated," she commented. She would ultimately become one of the novel's most famous advocates during this time. Even Steinbeck himself replied, "I've been called a liar so constantly that I wonder whether I may have dreamed the things that I saw and heard." Following the rapid success and attention the novel produced, Hollywood decided to have its piece of the pie, so to speak. In 1940, director John Ford debuted his film version of The Grapes of Wrath, which would later land him an Oscar for Best Director. Ford wanted the film to feel as real as the cruel circumstances that Steinbeck had described, deciding to give the film a documentary-style look and feel. They began production under the fake title Highway 66, so that while shooting the controversial novel, they would not be affected by union problems and, I believe, probably protesters as well. Prior to filming, one of the producers sent out undercover investigators to the migrant camps to ensure that Steinbeck hadn't indeed exaggerated the claims and events. He was horrified to discover that, if anything, Steinbeck seemingly downplayed them. Henry Fonda starred as Tom Joad. Though he was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actor in a Leading Role, he didn't win. He did, however, make an impression on the author himself. Greatly impressed with the film as a whole and how it turned out, Steinbeck commented that Fonda's performance made him believe his own words. Jane Darwell, who played Ma Joad, did win an Academy Award for Best Actress in a Supporting Role. Just like the book, the movie was met with harsh criticism as well, though not until much later during the 1960s. Leslie Gossage offers a response to this, suggesting that critics' tastes change as their perspectives change. In the 1960s, Gossage explains, critics detested sentimental manipulation in cinema and perhaps also expected the current audiences to be more politically and socially liberal than the audiences were when Grapes was filmed. Gossage believes that much was lost from Steinbeck's work to Nunnally Johnson's script, but those who watched the film praised it immensely. To this day, Ford's version is still the only major Hollywood production of The Grapes of Wrath, implying that he must have done something right. As we can see, The Grapes of Wrath has had a great impact on American literature and culture, both good and bad. It puts some of our American history into context for students and readers today. It gave voice to the working class of America, significantly calling for action and change. It personalized the real-life turmoils that thousands of families were enduring at the time. Many schools and universities, like my own high school and UAA obviously, still use it in their curriculum when teaching about the impacts of literature during this Great Depression era. While some critics today still question its overall success, many continue to admire Steinbeck's work and honesty. Indeed, John Steinbeck remains to be one of the great authors of American literature's history. Despite those good and bad criticisms, it has held on through the last 8 decades, and it continues to be an essential piece of literature in our American literature canon. Thank you for watching my literary movie on John Steinbeck and the Grapes of Wrath. I hope it was insightful and interesting, and at the same time, informative. Thank you.